more or less hour. And I'm very, very happy to welcome three inspiring female role models this afternoon. At least it's afternoon here in Germany. And I'd like to introduce you to our female role models. And for one of them, it's not afternoon, it's early in the morning. And I'd like to welcome you, Sandy, and Sandra Milligan is head of research and development for Organon, a healthcare company operating worldwide. Sandy is a graduate of George Washington University School of Medicine, and she received a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. And we also have Ingrid Wünning-Tschol, who for 22 years works for the Robert Bosch Stiftung, being Senior Vice President of the Foundation and a biologist by training. And also I'd like to welcome Monika Lessl, who's Executive Director of the Bayer Foundation and Head of Corporate R&D and Social Innovation at Bayer AG. She holds a PhD in biochemistry and a diploma in general management. So we have three inspiring women who look on their careers. And before I'd like to ask them personal questions about their careers and also about women in leadership in general, I would like to know to all the three of you the question, which is or will be the biggest science breakthrough of the 21st century in your opinion? Ingrid, maybe you'd like to start presenting your idea.
I'm afraid that we will all agree on that. It's definitely the CRISPR-Cas9. It's a funny sounding acronym which stands for a method to edit genes in an amazingly precise manner. And I think, until 2012, I didn't think that it would be possible so soon, but it has enormous potential to meet some of the biggest challenges in the world, not only in medicine, but also in agriculture. It will meet the challenge of hunger. It will meet the challenge of diseases. So it is really, really amazing. And we all know who received the Nobel Prize for this. So the question of which role women played in this is very easy to answer. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to see other answers to that.
Maybe Monika?
Yeah, but I have to say Ingrid was right. I also think that this is kind of the biggest breakthrough because exactly it not only transformed research. Yeah, I'm a biologist, and if I remember how we did, for example, knockout mice to study certain disease mechanisms, it took years. Now you can make it in a week. So this is just one example. So it transforms research. It gives options for cure, if I think about gene therapy and others. And exactly, food, and especially now with respect to climate change, yeah, if I think about drought-resistant plants, so this is really a fantastic option to develop new types of seeds in a fast manner and adapt. So it's really amazing. And of course, the two women, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier, are also amazing. And I have to say, we are especially proud because we awarded Emmanuelle Charpentier the Hansen Award of the Bayer Foundation before she received the Nobel Prize. So we were happy to pick her. But both are amazing women. But it's not because of this fact. It's really a breakthrough, an absolute breakthrough. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. Sandy, I sent you the question too, and maybe you have a different thought on breakthrough, or maybe you have a hint what is still to come in the 21st century.
Yeah, I'd actually like to take a little bit higher level view just from the position that, or the experiences I've had. What I'm excited about is the closer collaboration between the regulatory agencies, particularly in the medical side, in understanding what the scientific breakthroughs are. I think sometimes we have amazing science that doesn't get the right traction at the agencies. And if you don't have an agency approval, of course, you can't have access for patients. So I think it's important not just to have those scientific breakthroughs, but also have that you have to bring the health authorities along with you in order to get the pathways so you can expedite some of the thinking and the application. I think a really great example of that has been the mRNA vaccines for COVID. Just absolutely phenomenal how a science was accelerated, but also bringing along those agencies so that we could get those vaccines approved in record time. So I think it's not just the science, it's how we apply the science and how we adopt it for use in a broader medical field or agriculture or animal husbandry.
Well, thank you very much. That perfectly leads to my second question, which is a little bit historically. What role do women play in these breakthroughs? And and how far has scientific excellence changed in history from a single genius, men making discoveries, to women being instructive and charismatic leaders of great teams and research groups? Feel free to just take up the word and answer.
Maybe I can answer. I think maybe it's not only related to women. Science changed, yeah. And if you look also, other topic, if you look on breakthrough, is really the convergence between biology and data, or if you look on the world of physics, yeah, you need kind of large groups to answer these kind of big questions, yeah. If you look on kind of the first photograph of the black hole, yeah, it were 200 people or even more working together, and I think we have these big challenges, and there we need kind of larger groups working together, and it may play more in the hands of women because often it's being said that women are more collaborative or more open. But I think this is a general development of science. You can count a number of authors on papers. So Nature still has the same number of articles, but the number of authors has doubled in the last 30 years. So this is a clear indication that it is about collaboration. Yeah? And here it's about the diversity to make it really innovative and creative. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry.
I've been thinking hard about this question, and because my first initial reaction was also women do not play a specific role in this general tendency that society and science are moving closer together. But then I've observed a few things within the last few years. Nature changed its editor-in-chief. As much as I really respected and liked Philip Campbell, he was a wonderful chief editor, but now Magdalena is there, and now look at Nature, and Nature has become a very different journal ever since. It has become much more human and human interest oriented. I, as a woman, enjoy very much now to read the first part of Nature, and it really excites me again and brings me back into science, which I left at the end of the 80s when I came back from MIT after 5 years. And the way she organizes the whole journal is completely different and much more society oriented. The same is true for Katja Becker, who is now the president of the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. And she is the first one that really dares to emphasize very much what an important role science plays for society. That was simply not the case with her predecessors. And when I was at the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft in the 90s, it was always the blue sky research, the basic research that we held very high. And we said it's only for basic research, and that's what we're there for. And we didn't even dare to say that, application research would be something that we would like to fund. That has changed entirely now. So I think women did play an important role. And look at UCRI, the monster organization in the UK that has also gotten together to make inter and transdisciplinary research very important. Yes, Wolpert has started it, and of course he's a man, but now Dame, what's her name again? Ottolin Leiser has taken over, and she really takes it to an extreme. So I think, yes, women do play a very important role towards that, bringing science and society together and making it very clear what an important role science plays.
Actually, go ahead. I would like to ask some questions about the everyday work life of young female or not so young female scientists, because even though the percentage of women finishing an academic degree, at least in Germany, is higher than the percentage of men. However, female academics have still problems taking up the positions you just described, Ingrid. And I would like to know how we can, around the globe, improve work conditions generally to reach more diversity, not only in terms of diversity of sexes, but also ethnic backgrounds, family models, and personal views. Sandy, you work in the US. Could you describe the situation there? And do you have any ideas for us about this topic?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest struggles in the United States is lack of affordable childcare. And unfortunately, what we see is we see ambitious, smart, bright women coming up through the sciences. But when they start to have or choose to have a family, oftentimes they are just by design or by effect, find themselves unable to support both a career and raising a family. The US doesn't have a lot of part-time models to hold out as examples or work share models to hold out. But I think one of the most significant impacts here is that lack of childcare or lack of affordable childcare. And I think it really can be a hiccup for women. I also find just in my 20 plus years of managing different teams that it is hard for, and honestly, I don't think it's gender so much. It's hard for the returning parent to get back into work and to get back into work at the same level that they left their work to do childcare. And, poignantly in the US, it's considered a very great company if you get 6 weeks off after having a baby, which I know is quite different than some of the other countries, particularly in Europe. And women are grateful for 6 weeks off. And so when they take additional time off, it's not protected time off. So I think there are definitely different cultural and country aspects. But what I find is that carousel of trying to bring your family priorities in with your career priorities is hard to manage.
Mm-hmm.
May I say something to that?
Yeah.
One term that we very often hear in this context is the work-life balance. And I don't really like this term in the context of academic science, because it just doesn't sound right, because it sounds as if if there was a compartmentalization. There's work on one side and life on the other side. But those scientists that I have known and still know, for them, science is life. And they're very passionate about it. And I think those that lead to the breakthroughs also are very passionate. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to work 24 hours, 7 days a week. But I think what they need is best practice for integrating family life and science, just like you said, Sandra. And I think it's not only childcare, but childcare with flexible hours, because in the experimental sciences, you can't tell your gel or nature in general to fit into an 8-hour schedule. What they did back in the 80s when I was at MIT was we had some technicians in the lab, and it was an unspoken rule that were perfectly ready to work odd hours. So they only came into the lab at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and worked into the night. And it was an unspoken rule that those who had family fathers and family mothers, they were mostly fathers, that they could, use them most to stop their gels and to do this and that. And I think this is one idea that might work. It worked very well for them, because then these parents could go home for dinner when they had small children, to have lab meetings at normal hours, close by housing for families, not just for students, to save the commute. And all these kinds of things would make it so much easier to still dedicate your life as much as you can to science, even household help and so on, and to integrate family life to that. I think part-time may not really work in some of the scientific disciplines. It may work in others, but maybe those scientists that lead to breakthroughs, they don't even want that so much. They want a life that where the children fit to their science life and science fits to the children. And so many things can be made much, much easier. So integration, not compartmentalization. So that's a difficult word.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe I can also just add, because we did also a series of interviews also with some young women academic leaders. And one challenge for them is, for example, if they are, for example, chemists or so, and they are pregnant, of course, they cannot work in the lab then, yeah. So, and if they get additional help, like an extra PhD student who can then kind of have do additional work for them, that's of course a great help. So it's really about these practical solutions that are needed. And a great example, I have to say, Christiane Nüßlein-Vollhardt, she has her own foundation. And so we also work together with her, where it's really about super practical support. You can have a nanny at home, so give a little bit extra money for hiring that nanny. Or, as I said, but what is also very important is that in the lab they have maybe an extra staff to manage that situation. And then the other part is, can we have more tenure positions, because then it gets also quite difficult to move around so often. And if there is the possibility after being a junior professor to have a more tenure track, that's also something which is very helpful for women. Yeah. So, and maybe also for other families, of course. Yeah. So these were things that kind of really very clearly surfaced also in these discussions.
And you named tenure track. Tenure track is also good to make positions internationally comparable and to not have every country have its own scientific system. So you're kind of stuck in your country or in the country you did your PhD or you did your postdoc. Thank you for that, because we haven't been speaking about it lately when we have different ideas about what can enable female scientific excellence. Which is what comes to your mind? Just name three, or maybe only two additional ideas about what really enables female leadership in science. And before I give the word back to the panel, I'd like to encourage you, the audience, to put your questions into the chat. I'll take them up and ask them from about 3 minutes ahead. So Monika, are there any more ideas than the tenure track system which you would like to emphasize here in order to enable female science excellence? What are the striking factors?
Yeah. I think, as I already said, very practical support, additional help, tenure track. And then I think the other one is really about presenting yourself, maybe also support in how to be present more in, be it in debates or be it increasing visibility. Yeah. So I think that's also an important aspect to take into account. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. There are some questions in the chat already. And if you ask your questions in the chat and you would like to address one of our role models personally, just write their first name and I can ask them directly. The first question asked in the chat was by Prasanna, and she asks, I often think if work-life balance is actually necessary. Wow. On one hand, it's very, very important for health, but on the other hand, it slows down the work progress. So I'd like to give this question to Sandra, because she's a healthcare specialist. And are there many diseases resulting from not separating work and life? So in the end, you have health problems because you lived your dream and didn't think of your health?
Well, I like to think of it not as a balance, and I can't remember if it was Monika or Ingrid who mentioned, compartmentalizing, work and life. I like to think of my work and life, or my work, as a ribbon that runs through my life. And during the different phases of my own journey, there are days when I had the children and they were quite young there were days where I was a phenomenal mom, right? I went to the school, I baked the cupcakes, I was there. And then there were days where I was a phenomenal employee. I worked 7 in the morning till 10 at night. And I think I had to give myself some grace. I had to not push myself so hard to understand that those 2 days, great mom, great employee, staff member, great scientific leader, they may not be the same day. So what I worry about from a medical perspective is the amount of stress that we're putting on ourselves, trying to be super mom, super scientist, super well-centered, super cook, super dog walker, whatever it may be. And I think that we all have to find that place where we provide ourselves some excuses to be good enough on certain days.
So caring for your health is caring for yourself, actually.
Exactly.
Another question asked in the chat that I think is very important is that it's actually a comment rather than a question, because there's no question mark. No, I see it. Alessandra comments that she thinks that the important thing is that you have the choice. So you have, like you described, you have the choice to do either one thing or the other, but you have the liberty to decide how you want to distribute your commitment. Ingrid, when I asked the question about the 3 most striking factors of becoming successful in science as a female leader, and now listening to the comments I read out and the other panel female role models posed, is there anything we miss in our discussion still? Do you want to add some factors of success?
I'll try. I think the gender bias still persists, and there is a good test that Harvard published, I think, several years back, and more people are doing this test. And I did the test myself. It's an bias implementation test or something like that. I don't know exactly what it is called. And guess what? Even I'm moderately gender biased. So I think we have to overcome gender bias, and I know that there are trainings against it. That is one important thing. The other thing is that one big factor in becoming a great leader, be it male or female, is, of course, if you truly feel the passion for science. And that's, I think, is particularly true in academic science or any place where you have the freedom of science, where you can really follow your curiosity. And so 2 advices to young scientists would be: reflect about this early. If you want to have your life integrated into science, which is your passion, then I think academic career is right for you. If you want something else, and if you want the compartments, and if you want to have rather defined hours, maybe doing science or doing something with science in another section of life, which is what I have decided when I came back from the United States after 5 years of postdoc at MIT, maybe a better option. And then, of course, all these practical things that were mentioned by Sandra, by Monika, and myself, that really help scientists, female scientists, more likely to focus on, or to make it easier to be a mother, and to really focus on their kids, but maybe not so much on household, and then to focus on science again.
Yeah. I'm blurring my background, which is a very easy way to get rid of household because I'm working from home this afternoon. Just kidding. It looks well here. But there's a comment in the chat. We rather have comments than questions. So feel free to ask questions, but also if you want to add comments, feel free to do that too. There is a short comment, short and sharp, by Carolina, And she writes that long hours does not equal high quality. People work differently, and maybe especially gender work differently, because we all know these situations that as a mother, you have to leave earlier than the single colleagues. And how can we get rid of this prejudice that working long and showing presence for a long time kind of equals being excellent? How can we differently measure excellency and good ideas than with time?
May I take this? I mean, in my career, I have never seen that those people spending long hours but not being productive were praised more than those that worked short hours. Actually, the best postdocs back then in the lab, but our friends are the ones that work only certain hours. I think it's those long hours that you have to spend in the lab in order to finish your experiment. It's not the long hours that you spend in the lab because you have many coffee breaks and talk to your colleagues. And I think a good PI sees that. But of course, you have to have a good PI to recognize that. But I haven't seen it, quite honestly.
Okay, well, my scientific experience after finishing my studies is short, but it's in the philosophical department of my university. I'm a historian by training, and historians really like to stay long hours in the night discussing about whatever. And we really have seen that, especially us, the young mothers, that there were evening talks, and there were after evening talks like the half night through, and those participating were kind of favored than those to those going home. I have made this experience. Maybe it's different in the social sciences and from the MINT sector. But another question.
I can also say a few words to this. I think it's the classical so-called presence culture. Yeah. So, but maybe Corona helped us here to overcome this a bit. Yeah. I mean, also in industry, of course, we had this challenge. And for me, also another really aspect of being successful as a woman is flexibility, indeed. And I think this Sandy also mentioned this. So, but I think Corona really showed that you don't have to sit in your office or be at the lab in order to be successful. Yeah. So, and this really have shifted, at least also for us in industry, completely the paradigm. Yeah. So we will have now a new work concept, which means half of the work you are present and the half of the work you can flexibly work. Yeah. And I think this also was the case, of course, for academic institutes. People were not in the lab. Of course, the moment you have to do the experiment, and this was, I think, what Ingrid was referring to, you have to be there, but you don't do experiments 24/7. So, and I think this really is maybe a positive effect from Corona, that we have now this flexibility and the trust we can also work in other ways.
Yeah, the new work experience is a very interesting and important topic, especially for female leaders and for future female leaders. So question to you, Sandra, and also to you, Ingrid, and also to you, Monika, if you want to answer. Seen from the other way around, how do you lead a team remotely when you have to lead people who are actually not physically in the same room?
Yeah, I can start. I agree. I think COVID has taught me skills that I didn't think I had before. And I don't know about folks on the phone, but when this just started for us in the United States, it was in March of last year, and we were sent home indefinitely and told to use video conferencing. We got on the phone. Everyone talked on the phone. No one actually turned on the video. No one knew how to act in front of a video. But what I really loved to see was pretty quickly, we all adapted to this new environment. And I think sometimes this environment can be just as intimate as a big auditorium conversation, if you will. So I think going forward, the other part that really I was excited about, I had to build a new senior leader team, and I was able to hire people outside of the United States to be members of that senior team because of the flexibility. So I think that in the period of the 12 months, my organization has also become much more global and providing leadership opportunities outside of the traditional headquarters. So I'm actually quite excited by some of the learnings that we are carrying forward from the pandemic.
And has trust in employees exceeded since you can't see them personally that much anymore?
Well, it's a great question, Lisa.
Yes, it is.
So it is. My former boss at Merck, he was very much the person that would walk up and down the laboratory hallways, like to see his scientists working in the lab. So he was quite concerned when COVID came. And obviously we had heightened protections for those experiments and scientific endeavors that needed to continue. But after a few months, even he, after 40 years in industry, said, I'm amazed at how much work is getting done in this new environment. And I think it actually increased his trust significantly because the world didn't stop. Science didn't stop. The approval of medicines, the reach of medicines to patients didn't stop. I think that as an industry, as a group of academics, as scientists, we've demonstrated we can have more flexibility and less day-to-day, face-to-face supervision.
I have to catch up some questions from the chat. They center around female leadership and parenthood. This really seems to be the central question. And Sophie, for instance, asks, what are the policies in place in your organization? So to each of you, not as a woman, but as representing an organization that specifically address women entering the workforce post-maternity leave or re-entering workforce after taking time off raising children. Do you have special programs or ideas or specific headhunters? Monika, how is this with the Bayer Foundation and the Bayer AG?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a very important aspect, kind of to have a good comeback. But I think the most important part is that it's not really a comeback, to stay in touch. And this is also what we try to do, kind of stay in touch, have kind of intermediate connections. There's also a great possibility that you can work for certain hours during your motherhood. So you can decide, I just want to work 10 hours or so. And this at least helps you stay in touch, you know what's going on. And even if you don't decide to do so, you can do trainings, leadership trainings, or join time to time team meetings. And I would really encourage to do so, not to lose the complete contact. But this is all possible. I think we have a super high degree of flexibility here, but also I recommend using it. So because if you are really away and nobody's seeing you, there of course is always a risk that you will be kind of not being present. It has a lot to do with being present. And so I would really recommend use these opportunities.
May I also add to this?
Yeah, obviously.
I think the pandemic has really taught us to look more for the output and the outcome. And I think staying in touch with colleagues that are in parental leave is so much easier and so much more taken for granted. I mean, it's okay now to ask somebody, can we have a glass of wine in front of them or of the computer tomorrow night? Whereas normally you wouldn't do that. And so I'm actually much more in contact with those colleagues that are in parental leave than I used to be before. And I mean, and also it has turned out that you asked the question about trust before, that after a while going through the pandemic, it turns out that those people that were very efficient when we had the presence culture were the same that were very efficient when we had the home office. So it didn't change at all. And those who were slightly weaker before that, they turned out also to perform a bit weaker than the others in the pandemic. But I must say, some of the colleagues I see even more, it's those that I really work with and collaborate with than before the pandemic, because sometimes I was easily distracted and others were too. You had to go into this presence meeting and that, and you had much time where you spent on commuting and traveling and all these sorts of things. So lots of positive things came off. I cannot say that I'm not longing for seeing all the colleagues from other parts of the world again, and I think we all are. But there were many positive things that came about through this pandemic, and I think not only did they all work against women, I think some of them also worked for women.
There is a comment in the chat I'd like to transform into a question, because it broadens our mind towards other countries. Anna from Mexico writes, I work on reproductive ethical decision-making with my startup in development countries. Women have the option to preserve fertility if they want to pursue a career. In undeveloped countries, girls get pregnant while they are teenagers. Taking this, I'd like to ask a very big question. And I'm happy I'm the one who asks the questions and not the one who has to answer them. But is there, in your opinion, a perfect moment to have children? Or is it just always the best and the worst thing in life happening?
Yeah, I can go first. I think it, just to your point, Louisa, I think there's so many advantages to having your children when you're younger. And then there's so many advantages to having your children when you're older. And I was one of the older moms. I had my first child at 40 and my second child at 41. So for me, it was much easier, of course, to manage and grow my career by delaying family planning. But on the other hand, I also feel like I have made certain choices where I will be giving up 20 years of experience with grandkids as an example, right? Because I won't, unless I live to be 120, I won't have the same set of family richness that women who chose to have their children younger in their career will have. So I think, I do think, one of the key questions though, or one of the key points is access to family planning. I think without access, like we have in developed nations, we have long and short-term contraception that is available to us. We at least can manage the choice. I think for developing nations, that access to choice is not only there, which I think is one of the points that Anna was raising as well.
Yeah, I can maybe also add to this. I also think there's no perfect time. And maybe just when I was younger and I was a scientist in the lab, and I was keen on getting actually on a foundation and becoming the CEO of a foundation. And but I had also this trouble that I want to have children. And I know there was a conversation with another woman. I said, well, I really don't know what I should do, because I really want so much to have this position, but I also want kids. And then she just said to me, yeah, and then you do both. Just go for it and do it. Yeah. So it will never be perfect. And I think that's what I did in the end. And it's really about, go for it, and there will be a solution some way. There is no perfect timing. Yeah. So, and I never regretted it. It's been a great experience. And of course, sometimes it's not easy, but it's also a lot of fun. Yeah. So, yeah, there's no perfect timing, I guess.
Yeah, actually,
I'm keeping silent because I was not fortunate enough to have children, even though I always said when it happens, I'm the happiest person in the world, but it didn't happen.
but that's not a reason to remain silent for long, because I would like to ask a completely different question, or to put it with Monty Python, and now to something completely different. And I'd like to quote William Shakespeare and John Wayne. So finally, we're back to the men. Shakespeare wrote in my favorite play, Much Ado About Nothing, "Speak low if you speak love." And John Wayne said, "Talk low, talk slow, and don't talk too much." I'm referring to those two icons because I've been reading about human voices recently, and I found some studies that by social psychologists that underline the fact that we, and I mean we women and we men and we children and we everybody, is more keen to listen to people with low voices and loud voices, and to kind of intrinsically feel them to be important, and no matter what they say, listen, then we listen to people who talk in a high voice. And what I'd like to ask you on the panel is if this is a bias recently pointed out by science, that it's a limiting factor to success to have a tendency to a female voice. So the higher the voice, the less impact on being identified as a leader. Did you think about that in your career? And what kind of advice do you have to young female leaders to control the female voice, to lower the voice, or shall we just be confident about our beautiful female high voices?
I thought when you gave me that question that it was a very interesting question. And yes, I believe it is true what you say, or what those social scientists found out, that it probably even more true than for scientists in the banking world, in the selling world, and so on and so on. I always felt that in the science world, impressive minds overshadow impressive appearances. But having said that, I think it is an advantage when you're teaching, also maybe for interviews, if you train your voice to be loud, just in order to be heard. And that certainly helps. But maybe that bias is not as strong in the scientific world than in most of the rest of the world. I mean, probably I am biased too, and I wouldn't really buy an expensive car from a very high-pitched voice. I don't know, I have to test this. But if you think of the really great scientists that you know personally, do they all have low-pitched voice? Do they all have loud voices? In my personal case, Max Planck directors, even Nobel laureates and so on, I can say no, they have the funniest voices, they have the funniest appearances. And if you go to the Lindau Nobel Prize meeting or laureate meeting, and you hang around in the lobby of the Hotel Schachen, you see funniest dressed people, sometimes with low and high voices and whatsoever. I think science is one of the few domains where that doesn't seem to play such an important role as it may play in other worlds.
Thank you. Sandra?
Yep, I agree. I think that we need to learn how to modulate our voice and amplify our voice when it's important. And all of us, I think, recognize that our voices change when we talk to our children, when we talk to our boss, and the dogs. I still talk baby talk to my dog, and to your partner, right? And what I find, and just yesterday I had a difficult negotiation that I needed to lead us through, and I found myself speaking slower, more precisely, and making sure that I had key messages that people could walk away with. So sometimes I completely agree. Sometimes less words can be more impactful. And when I have an important meeting or an important negotiation or an important presentation, I can't emphasize practice, 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 right? And so the more you become familiar with your positions and your points of view and those core messages, the key messages you want to have taken away, the less extraneous words and spin you start to put on it. So I think that it is a matter of practice and assurance, but I do think that women can be very effective in how they communicate. It's just, but I love the point that science really is a language that has a voice of its own. And so recognizing not just the how a message is delivered, but what the message is, I think is really key.
Well, that's an optimistic perspective on that topic, because on the other hand, science and economy intertwine every day more. PhD and postdoc start founding their own companies. You have that startup culture from science. Scientists today have to be much more in public than they used to, or in television, radio, and of course YouTube live talks than they used to be years ago. And another question raised in the chat is that from you, the three of you on the panel, Aleftina would like to know if you could please give an advice how it would be possible to collaborate with male PIs of the same or higher status who do not want to accept equality and professional suitability just because you are female, despite you have much more confirmed experience in a particular field. I think we all know this just unspoken moment of being regarded just a female. Do you have strategies? Do you have humorous phrases to counter those moments? Or do you just smile them down?
I mean, my personal approach is try to talk to them on eye level and not make the scientific experience so much the topic, but sometimes in a humorous way also make fun of them. That shows them that you don't look up to them, but you look from eye level. But that's not always possible. And I know, I mean, you know, when you think back and you come across a PI like that, probably it's the best to not work with him, because with rational arguments, you cannot convince them, because they would always deny that they're biased. And so you can't convince them that that is not true. I think you should have a coach. And of course, there are good coaches and bad coaches, and maybe they can give you helpful advice fitting to your personality. But other than that, I just always talk to them on eye level and sometimes make little jokes about something little, not offensive. And that normally changes them around a little bit.
Sandra?
One approach I take, and admittedly, I've not spent a lot of time in a basic or translational research laboratory environment, but I have come across some aggressive men in leadership positions during my time in pharma. And if there is a particular discussion I want to have, a decision I want to be taken, knowing that the confrontation with the decision maker or that leader is not going to go well, sometimes I take the approach of influencing his influencers. So looking at the circle of listeners or influencers rather that he listens to and influencing them and kind of paving the road for the conversation that I eventually need to have. and recognizing sometimes that if I can get those influencers to have the leader think it was his idea when it was actually my idea, then it's a win-win.
Yes.
I get to do what I need to do, and he thinks he gets all the glory. So that is an approach I will take at times as well.
Me too. And I've done it many times.
That's a very good advice, actually. I've been having the privilege to talk to Elisabeth von Thadden, who's a German journalist and kind of my journalistic role model. And she once said to me, be a cat, roll yourself together and just change your sleeping position and just don't argue again in a different way. If you've already made your arguments 2 or 3 times, just be a cat and be relaxed. And I always have that metaphor in my mind, and I'm trying to be a cat and just being silent from time to time.
But I think it's also important not to give up then, yeah? I mean, just keep going, yeah? I mean, sometimes you have to shut up in a certain moment, but then on the long run, don't lose your long-term goal, yeah? And come back and then be strong. I think that's really also for me, because always you have setbacks, but then be strong and say, no, but I go for it. And on the long run, I will be the ones who is winning, yeah? So, and I know it's sometimes difficult, but I think don't lose your vision and your focus. I think that's also very important. Yeah? And I mean, what Sandy said, of course, influencing is a key part. The more you come into roles, leadership roles, influencing is absolutely key, yeah, that you can play that game. So yeah, these are 2 things, but keep your goal, don't lose it. Yeah.
I'm very happy that there is a question, one more question in the chat. Bella from Melbourne, Australia asks, how did you know who to collaborate with during your career journey? Were there signs and signals you learned along the way to look out for, especially ones we might be able to determine in this remote world? So this brings us back to the new work experience, but also to the old connections. How did you feel who to collaborate with or who to rather not collaborate with? What can give us hints and prevent us from telling intimate things to the wrong person? What kind of advice do you have? It's a very, very good question, I think.
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that specific question, but it does make me think about mentors, right? And I will admit that I have not had a single mentor throughout my career, but what I rather have is a collection of people whose advice I trust and follow. And so I think of it as a bouquet of mentors, but I try, I have not said, well, I'm going to have this established mentorship because there's a lot of just rigor around it, and in my mind, sometimes artificiality. But I have a panel of people that I trust, and it could be someone if I'm struggling with a topic in human resources, or I'm struggling with a scientific topic, or I'm struggling with how I'm showing up as a leader. I have trusted advisors, we can call them mentors, that I've built relationships over the years. And I think, so I call it, or I say, don't single source your mentorship. So I know it's not an exact answer to that question, but hopefully I'm helping the dialogue.
Thank you. I think especially the idea of manage your mentors is interesting, because as a manager, you always strive to have 2 equally good people for one position. So if one is dropping out, it's not a big problem for the whole project. And And that's a good idea to not only have one mentor, but to have a bouquet of mentors. I like the metaphor. Do you, Monika or Ingrid, have thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, sometimes it is the topic that makes you choose your collaborative partner. You don't have a choice. You really have to, you can't say, well, I'd like to work with him, but he doesn't work in that field that I need a collaborator with. So you have to work with a collaborator that may not be your dream collaborator. But if I have the choice, I look for affirmative personalities, and that I find it very easy to work with, where the chemistry is right. And then normally that is a very productive environment. But sometimes you simply don't have a choice because the topic defines who you have to collaborate with. And then I think mentorship and coaching really helps.
Yeah, I also think that, of course, your gut feeling is very important to guide you. But then there is also another way of thinking about it. What is in for them? Yeah, I mean, why does it make sense for them to work with you? Yeah, is there a benefit for both of you if you collaborate? Yeah, and that could also be an interesting perspective. Yeah, to put yourselves in their shoes. Yeah, so why should they work with you? And helps you, first of all, getting good arguments, but then also understanding, is that a right partner or not? Yeah.
We're almost done, and we have to keep the time in mind. And it was only an hour. It was an extraordinarily experience talking to you for an hour. And the final question is not mine. I'd like to give the word again to Brazana, who asked the first question in the chat, and she's the one who asks the last question in the chat. And it's the question, if any of you ever regretted a career choice, and any piece of advice for young female scientists. What should you do if you start regretting about the choice? I'd rather like to put it that way because I'd like to finish with something optimistic rather than deprived.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
I have never regretted, but I'm currently in the position to give advice to my stepson, who is also a scientist, and he's 29. And I think it is most important that you reflect early on in your career. Do you want to go to the academic side of the scientists, where only very few make it to the professorship, and otherwise I think the perspectives are rather boring, and if you only change back into another field when you're 40, that might be too late. So really start thinking in your late PhD time, early postdoctoral time, the latest, what you really want to do. Do you want to be a lab scientist, or do you want to be an academic scientist, or do you want to do something else with your science, or do you want to go to industry? And read job advertisements for that. And then try to think, what would I have to do? Does that really hit me? Is that really something that I would like? And even if you don't look for a job right now, start reading job advertisements as early as possible and try to identify what they want from you. And then reflect on it. Is that what you want? Sorry, I'm being too long.
No, I completely agree with you, Ingrid. No, I agree. I tell my staff all the time to take the calls from the headhunters, to take the calls, because you need to know what your capabilities are, what your experience will get you if you do want to make change. And so you need to be attuned to what the world is expecting for someone in a position that you want to take. So I think that's excellent advice. And there's nothing wrong with making sure that you are managing your career actively. And if you don't like what you're doing now, the best advice is to change. Just change.
Exactly.
So if the final word is don't be afraid of change, I again thank you, and I'd like to change to the wonderful team of Falling Walls. It's 2 minutes past 4 in the afternoon in Germany. It's 2 minutes past whatever somewhere else in the world. And we have some other topics on the program. So thank you very, very much for sharing this hour with us, Monika, Ingrid, and Sandra. And goodbye.
Goodbye. It was lovely.
Bye.
Goodbye. It was a real pleasure.